And we're on the air.
Awesome. Well, welcome to Pen and Stylus. This is going to be our very first episode.
Hello.
Hello. So I'm Ben Girven. I'm joined by Nathan Rackley and Jenn Myers, both artists that I've met and known for a few years now. So we kind of all got together and decided we wanted to do this thing, which is basically a online, on-air show where we talk about drawing digitally.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're all brand new at this, obviously. I think Nathan's got some experience. We don't know what we're doing.
Oh, no, anyway, we know what we're doing. We just haven't streamed a whole lot before, so...
Yeah, that's true.
As a group.
So yeah, basically what we're going to do is just talk a little bit about what we're doing, kind of where each of us, our backgrounds are, and kind of move on from there. Eventually we're going to do a challenge at the end of this sketchcast, I think is a better thing to call it than a podcast. We'll call it a sketchcast.
I like that.
So anyway, I guess we can go ahead and get started.
Mm-hmm.
You guys want to all introduce yourselves, or?
All right. Well, I'll go ahead, and then Jen can introduce herself. All right. So hi, I'm Nathan Rackley. I am a digital artist predominantly. I'm a cartoonist and comic artist. I did a newspaper strip for several years called Lakewood. And now I'm actually gearing up to start publishing online for free my first full-length graphic novel, which is called Minions. So for all of you who are interested in epic fantasy with monsters and knights and dragons and stuff like that, stay tuned for that. That's going to be starting to publish online shortly. As far as me as an artist, I've been working. I started in the art field around, I would say it was around 10 years ago. I really didn't know a whole lot about digital art, but then I sort of taught myself and worked through the whole process kind of on my own, stumbled through a lot of stuff until I found other people to explain things to me, and then I started, the more I worked with it, I kind of fell in love with doing art digitally and sharing art online and interacting with people online, and so as a result of that, I ended up being able to share and publish things on the internet, and that actually ended up landing me other jobs, other illustration jobs. I do some concept art for video games, and I also do other freelance cartoon work for people. So anyways, that's me. I'm Nathan Rackley. So I go by the screen name Drokir online. So drokir.deviantart.com is my internet gallery, and at Drokir on Twitter. And so I'm always open to discussion. Feel free to ask me questions. I'm usually around. I do respond to everybody. If I don't think you're a robot, I will respond to you. So anyway, so that's me.
A robot.
Yeah, not a robot. And then I guess we'll go ahead and go to Jen. So Jen, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Jenn Myers. I do webcomics over at typoedmary.com, and I don't even know how I got into this. I think I was just doing it as kind of a hobby. That's a big moth. Can't trust me, that thing's huge. I started doing webcomics, I think, just as something to do when I got off work, and then when I was in school, I kept doing it, and it was kind of interesting because a lot of my art teachers had never heard of anything like webcomics. They thought I was like some sort of great innovator, and I'm like, no, I'm not. Man, I'm really terrible at having an online gallery too. I do try to do the DeviantArt, but
but you're
really found my login stuff because of you, Nathan.
Well, but your webcomic essentially is your gallery. I mean, isn't that your webcomics are what you produce the most?
They are now. But I mean, I used to do a lot of other stuff like more, I don't know, fine art. I don't know, pop surrealism. I don't know, you'd call it weird stuff. I'm guessing no cussing in this, right? We should keep this kind of...
Yeah, we want to keep
Right.
this family friendly.
All right. Yeah, weird stuff is what I was
Weird
drawing.
stuff.
Weird stuff.
Awesome.
Weird stuff.
All right, so Ben, you want to introduce yourself? I mean,
Sure.
you started talking, but
I'm Ben Girven. I generally go by Neb, artistically anyway. I'm a artist, and I've actually been working with Jen's husband on a project called Terraformers. Most recently, for a very long time, I've been artist and co-creator on a book that I've been working on with a friend of mine called Stomping Ground, which has been kind of a long time coming. But
Which has beautiful art, but no issues.
I know. So I've been doing digital art primarily for the last, since like 2011, I think. I kind of delved deep into that, and I've just kind of been teaching myself how to do it from there. And let's see what else. Yeah, I think I've been kind of wanting to draw comics as long as I, realized that there was actually somebody that did that for a job. That kind of enticed me. I don't think of it as a job as much anymore as in the way that I'm going to get paid doing it. But just the idea of doing the work and drawing comics has always been really appealing to me. So just kind of fell into it. So.
Very cool. Yeah, I think a lot of us ended up sort of falling into the whole comic thing. I mean, I started out my art background actually back 10, 15 years ago was actually in photography. I was learning to become a photographer, and sort of just through that and we'll get into this a little bit later during our generalized discussion. But I ended up getting into digital art because of my photography. It actually sort of branched into it, and then I got into comics because of that.
Yeah.
Which was really kind of funny because I did all this photography stuff, and that was what I had all my formal training in. But then I ended up making most of my money doing illustrations instead of photography. So but very interesting process, and that's actually one of the topics that's the main topic of this show today is kind of just discussing getting started in digital art, how each of us kind of recounting just real briefly kind of how we each ended up getting into digital art. So is there anybody that wants to kind of take away that discussion or start that discussion on how they got started?
Jen, you want to go or you want me to?
No, you go for it.
Okay. Let's see. So roll back the clock here. I think the first time I actually got into doing any sort of digital work was basically digital coloring, Photoshop, way back in the day, probably early to mid 90s. It was the first time I got my hands on a hand scanner, so not a traditional flatbed scanner like we have now. It's one where you actually grab a device and you go, you actually pull it down across the image and scan it. And I think we could only scan, I don't know, maybe 5 inches at a time wide. And that was the first time I had ever taken one of my drawings and scanned it into the computer, and that was the very first time I ever did any coloring digitally, and I immediately fell in love with it. And I think the biggest hindrance there was the cost of the software, the fact that I didn't have a computer that was really powerful enough to really do much, and really, I mean, I think it was like Photoshop, maybe 3, possibly even 2. So it goes way back, and it was before that software was really designed to do much other than touch up photos. But I immediately saw the potential of it being able to draw, or rather color, and I've always kind of pursued that. And for many years, I just kind of built up that skill set of doing it on my own. And I never took any classes on Photoshop or anything like that. I just, I just figured it out. And did what seemed right at the time, and colored most of my images in Photoshop, and spent ridiculous amount of time doing touch up before I realized that you could actually do a multiply, which is something I won't even want to get into. But yeah, that is kind of how it started, and it just kind of developed into the very first time I got my hands on a Wacom tablet PC. And could actually draw on the screen. I was quite literally hooked. That was the moment. It just like all the the clouds parted, the sunshine came down, and I was like, oh, this is amazing.
Were you trying to draw? Were you trying to draw with a mouse at any point?
I had tried. I had even tried with the old Wacom tablets where you're drawing here and looking here, and I could never get that down.
Yeah.
I know both of you guys can do that. That was one skill I just never. It was too disconnected for me, so I could never do it. I think I own probably 2 or 3 tablets that I'd buy, try them out, and shortly after spending $100, $200 on it, I realized it didn't work for me, and I'd put it away on a shelf and never look at it again. It's an incredible waste of money.
That hurts.
I know it does. It does. But yeah, like I said, that first moment I had that. The Wacom, actually, I tell you the make and model. It's like your very first car. It was a Lenovo, I guess it was an IBM still, but X41 tablet PC. Not a very powerful little machine by any stretch of the imagination. I think it only had like 40 gig hard drive. But that was the first time I was able to take a stylus and draw directly on a monitor and see what I was doing, and yeah, that really kind of got me started, and pretty much from there on out, it's been upwards and forwards. So
very cool. So Ben, like what? So you talked a little bit about your first hardware. So you had so you started with essentially Lenovo. All-in-one then,
yeah.
And then you went after that.
I ran that for about. Okay, I used to work at a computer shop, and I had this is a funny story, but I had a really nice old lady that came in and bought a brand new laptop from me, and in getting her set up on the new laptop, she I got it all set up for her. I handed it off to her, and I said, there you go, you're all set. And she's like, well, can you do something with this old one, recycle it or whatever? And I looked at it, and I'm like, are you sure? She's like, oh yeah, I don't need it anymore. I'm like, I can recycle that for you. And I had a really good relationship with the owner of the shop, and I had I had a good I kind of had my pick of a lot of the stuff that came in the door that way. So luckily I was able to take that, and I think the very first thing I did was upgrade it to Windows 7, put a little bit more memory in it. Unfortunately, it's a non-standard hard drive, so it wasn't something I could upgrade, so it was locked at a 40 gig hard drive, which is nothing. But it was a good toy to play around with and kind of get my feet wet, so to speak.
Yeah.
I tried out, different software, just tried different things, just kind of getting the feel for it. And I did eventually, I ran that for about a year, kind of off and on. It wasn't a full-time thing. It was more of a toy. But I ran that for a while, and then I finally decided that it was time to upgrade, and I went on eBay and bought a X41 tablet, which is the model basically up from the one I had. And that one, I think the X41 was I think it was a Pentium 4, I think. Not very powerful. The next one I got, the X61, was a dual core that had more memory, Bluetooth, and just a few other bells and whistles, and a better or a more standard hard drive. so I can swap it out and put a bigger hard drive in it and more memory and everything. So that was kind of my go-to machine for about a year, and that's where I really just kind of took on the idea of digital inking and digital coloring. Well, not so much digital coloring, but kind of trying to up my game a little bit and figure out.
When was this? Because you're saying Windows 7, so when was this?
2012, I think.
Okay, so it's
no,
still
I take it back. 2011. So I would have got that in 2011.
That's fine.
Okay.
And I had because I worked at the shop, we got a preview copy of Windows 7. So I was playing with it. I was actually the only person in the shop really messing with Windows 7 before it came out. And I was putting it on like literally every machine I could put it on. And that was one of them, the tablet. But yeah, it was good. It was a good little machine. I still have it. I still occasionally kind of think about pulling it out and using it. But like I said, I ran that for about a year, and then early 2012, I upgraded to a Cintiq 21UX, which is a gigantic upgrade. Because you're no longer tethered to basically a laptop. Now you have a screen that can tie to any computer, and my desktop computer is much faster than my laptop, so that really opened up some doors as well, and just more space, because I was going from a little screen that was about yay big to something that's about that big, and it doesn't seem like it's a huge difference, but it's a huge difference.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool, actually. So, anyways, Jenn, just wondering. So, how did you end up getting started with the entire concept of digital art?
Well, I'd been doing a lot of traditional art, and I didn't have a scanner, so I ended up finding jobs that had scanners, and then in my spare time, my downtime at work, I would just scan in just tons of art, and then one of my friends had a job at CompUSA, and he was like, "Hey, these things called the Intuos tablets are on sale right now. Do you want to get one?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine. I can draw with a mouse. I don't need one of those." But they were on sale, and then with his employee discount, it was just like, all right, I'm doing this. So
yeah.
I ended up getting one of those, and it pretty much instantly changed me from being a traditional artist and doing a lot of that crow quill inking into being a digital artist. And it was an old Intuos 3, so it was before you had the screen. So I'd be drawing over here, but looking over here, so I'd be all contorted trying to figure out what I was doing. And I guess Ben said that he couldn't do that, but I got pretty good at that.
Yeah.
And then only recently did I upgrade. I want to say last year, I think, did I upgrade to my my Cintiq. So.
Okay.
And this was back in. I'm looking at my files here. I guess this was back in 2009, but I thought it was 2008. But it looks like April of 2009 is when I first started. So.
That's pretty cool. I mean, so what software did you end up using when you started out? What did you?
I had a really old version of Photoshop, and I can't even tell you what it was. But it was this really old. I mean, it was the only thing that would run on my computer, and I had an old laptop that I think I'd bought for $200 with an extra $100 upgrade of cool stuff on it, and and that lasted me a few years. And I'm not like Ben. I'm not a tech person. I'm not like you or Ben, and I don't upgrade stuff. You guys have seen me try to just even open my email. I'm like, it's not my thing, man. But so software, I was just using Photoshop. I'd actually taken a bunch of courses in Photoshop, so I knew how to do some photo manipulation, but not really. But I'd never used it for just art, and so that was pretty cool. That was so again, kind of self-taught like you, Nathan.
Yeah.
On that.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Trained, but digitally self-taught. I'm fidgeting too much, aren't I?
It's fine. So, anyways, I guess I better talk a little bit about what I've ended up doing, or how I got started in digital art. I mean, like I mentioned before, I was a photographer, and back in, I think it was 2005, I believe. No, 2004. It was in 2004 that I ended up getting a digital camera. And it was my first digital camera, because they were like the new thing back then. I mean, it's crazy now because everybody has them, but back then they were really expensive. And so I got my first digital camera, and I was using it to take pictures and stuff like that, but I was having all sorts of trouble editing my photos. I mean, I had like Microsoft Paint, and that was about it because I had Windows. And of course, I didn't know about open source software or anything like that at the time, so I didn't know about like free software you could get. So I was like, well, I need to get something to edit my my photos, and kind of at the same time I was working. I was in high school at the time. I was working with the literary magazine. I was on the literary magazine team, and we did all of the editing and stuff for that. And so there was this really awesome program that they had there called Photoshop, and I was like, oh, this is kind of a cool program. I could probably use this to edit pictures, but I'd need to get a copy. And so then I looked up how much it cost, and I was like, okay, no, I cannot afford this. I'm a high school junior, high school senior. I don't have the money to spend on something this expensive. And so what I ended up doing actually was I was looking around, and I heard that there was this thing called Photoshop Elements that you could get, and I was like, well, that's kind of cool, but it's still like, it was still really pricey at the time. They had version 1 out, version 1.0 of Photoshop Elements was out at the time, and it was this new thing, it was Photoshop for the beginners, and I was like, yeah, but I still can't afford it. Well, anyways, fast forward a few months, I was at work, because I work for a local corporation for my other job, and so I was at work, and they had all this old computer equipment in the back, and so I was going through the computer equipment. I was like, what's this weird thing? I held up this funky looking board thing that had like a pen attached to it, and the guy goes, oh yeah, that's a digitizing tablet thing. And I was like, what does it do? I'd never seen one before. Mm-hmm. And it was like, oh yeah, you use it, and it lets you kind of like draw on the computer if you have programs for it or something. I don't know. We don't use it. I mean, I don't even know who owns it. And I was like, oh well, can I try it? And he said, yeah, I don't care. And so it was actually an Intuos 2. It was a really big one.
Yeah.
And it was one of these ones that had like a serial plug. It was not USB or anything like that. It was a serial plug plugged into the back of the computer. It was really hard. I had to search online to try and find drivers to get it running and stuff like that. I finally got it running at work on some software that they had, and at one point I was messing around with just saying, so I was like, oh hey look, it's a mouse, and I'm moving the thing down here and the mouse is moving around. I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then I open up this drawing program that we had on the work computers, and then I'd go like to the paintbrush tool, and I do a stroke, and I go, oh my gosh, the thickness of the line was based on how hard I pressed. I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I was brand new. I'd never really seen any of this stuff before, so I was kind of, surprised and astounded a little bit. Did we lose? I'm
here.
I think we lost my video feed for a second there. But anyways,
you're there.
Am I back? Okay. Yeah. No, the thing blinked. Anyways. Yeah, this will happen, folks, every once in a while when we're doing a live broadcast. But anyways,
my cat's yowling in the background now, so
I can't even hear it.
Good.
Now I can. Now that I'm listening for it, I can. But yeah. Anyway, so I thought the thing was so cool. I was like, okay, so this Intuos thing, I'd like to see what these are all about. And so I look up Intuos online, and I'm like, oh, I can't afford these either.
Yeah.
Because I was a student, and I didn't have a whole lot of money. What I earned, I ended up spending on school stuff. So, anyways, so I was saving up my money. I was like, well, I'd like to get something like this. I'd like to do something to help my photography. And so I ended up saving, and then I found out that there was a version of the tablet, a little baby one, that you could buy from the brand Wacom, which was supposed to be. It says the.
There it is. I think it just came back.
Dropped out for a second. Are we back?
I think so.
Okay. I bet the internet here in Albuquerque is being goofy or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyways. So what ended up happening was that I found out that Wacom, this brand, I did a lot of research, and I was like, and they were like, well, there's this brand that has pens that take a quadruple A battery. I was like, where am I going to get that? I have no idea. And then there was IEP Tech brands, and then there was this Wacom brand, and it said the pen doesn't require a battery. I was like, that's kind of cool. So this pen is wireless and doesn't require a battery. Anyways, I was looking around, and I found at a local store that they sold these tablets, and they sold these Wacom Graphire tablets, and when I was looking at the box, it said, comes with a free copy of Photoshop Elements 1.0.
That's cool.
And the price tag was $100, and I was like, I might actually be able to afford that.
Yeah.
You know, this is me, you know, as like a high school junior. I'm like, oh, well, I might actually be able to buy that. And so I saved a little bit, and then I went to the store, and it was one of these computer stores. We don't have it here anymore. It was CompUSA. I went down to the store, and I bought it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took it home, and I installed everything, and installed the Photoshop elements, and got the tablet running, and then I started doing, doing drawings on it, and then it ended up, I started editing photos, and then I realized that you could also do drawings on it. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool, because I'd got it so that I could just edit photos.
Yeah.
And then I started getting into drawing, and then, one thing led to another. I borrowed some software from some people. I wanted to learn kind of how to draw people, and then I started doing comics just as an exercise to learn how to draw. And then, lo and behold, 10 years down the road, I'm a professional cartoonist, and, I've had stuff published. And it was kind of crazy, and it all started. I was a very minimal budget. Had a very minimal budget when I was starting out. I wasn't working a high-paying job. I was making minimum wage, and I was working part-time or less than part-time, at the time. So I really did not have a budget. So I can understand where a lot of people come from when they say, I don't have a budget. I can't afford software. I can't afford equipment. Like, I understand. I've been there, but it really doesn't take a whole lot in order to get the equipment. Granted, if you have access to a computer, it doesn't take a whole lot to get the equipment that you need to start doing digital illustration. And for me, I found, I had done drawings with the mouse, in Microsoft Paint when I was younger and stuff like that, because I didn't know any better.
I did want to. I'm sorry.
Sorry
to interject, but I did want to make a point. A couple weeks ago, I did watch David Peterson do a Ustream, which was just phenomenal. David Peterson is the guy that draws Mouse Garden, and he still draws with a mouse. As one of the opportunities I get to actually ask him questions, and one of the questions I had asked him was if he had, Cintiq, because I assumed that's how he was doing. It's like, nah, I just use a mouse. I always have. So I mean, it can still be done even with the mouse. I mean, obviously it's harder, but it can be done.
Yeah, and yeah, you can draw with a mouse. I know a lot of really excellent artists who do.
Yeah.
And it is. If you're doing stuff like vector illustration, the mouse can be easier sometimes for stuff like that.
Sure.
But I just found, if you come from any sort of traditional backgrounds, traditional illustration, traditional drawing, if you draw with a pen and paper, pencil and paper, stuff like that, the stylus method actually, the biggest thing for me, because I do draw with a mouse every once in a while too, if I'm, in a hard place and I don't have a tablet with me. I found that the big thing that I end up doing is I end up with the if I'm drawing with the mouse, it just takes longer.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The tablet, what the tablet does is it saves you time, and time is money.
There's no learning curve. Well, I guess I should say no. There's not as much of a learning curve. I mean, if you can draw with a pencil, you can draw with a stylus. The two are not. They do work together. They're not.
They're not mutually exclusive.
Exactly, yeah. And one of the things I did kind of find out over the course of the the year and a half or so that I was transitioning from doing a lot of traditional inking to digital inking, because there was probably about a year and a half stretch where I didn't touch a traditional pen to paper. Everything I was inking digitally, and I really kind of thought. It was a really interesting thing to find out, but I really thought that I kind of lost that digital or traditional inking skill over that time because it's like a muscle. If you don't exercise it, it kind of atrophies. And it was weird when I picked up a pen again. My inking was better from spending all that time digitally inking, which doesn't make any sense at all. But you learn subtle little controls of the pen, or just different ways to kind of apply pressure to the pen that are directly correlate to the digital inking. But oddly enough, there's a counterpart to that in traditional inking as well. So they do kind of inform each other.
Yeah, and that's something that I've learned as well. I mean,
yeah.
The skills, the act of drawing actually helps you to form the capabilities, no matter what you're doing. So the better a traditional artist you are,
mm-hmm.
The better a digital artist you're going to be, and vice versa. At least that's definitely what I've found through the work that I've done.
They really do translate across. It's just from there it's trying to figure out exactly how the tools differ and how you can really harness that, which I'm just now starting to find out about those guys that are doing speed paintings. They use techniques that you can't really do traditionally, but you can still learn from it and then be like, oh, if I was doing it traditionally, like I think it would make you a faster painter.
Sure.
Like a traditional painter as well.
Actually, I think the only thing that doesn't translate between regular inking or traditional inking and digital inking is the undo button. That's it. I think that's really the only thing that that's kind of the end all be all benefit of digital inking is you have that undo.
we were at the rail yards the other day selling comics, and I'm signing them, and I spell my name wrong, And I'm like, oh, there's no undo button, and John looks at me, he's like, I've heard Ben do that, and I'm like, yeah.
I threw a book away once because I signed it wrong.
Yeah. Hey, so real quick, I thought I'd show this to you guys because this is actually the first drawing I ever did as with my Wacom tablet.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and you can see over here my layers list. I was getting kind of crazy there. I've got what is that? 8 layers?
Wow, Jen.
I know.
Wow. That's getting
and then look, I didn't even know. Look, I didn't even know what I was doing. I didn't know that you could use pressure sensitivity. Like it's all just as if I might as well have been using a mouse,
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that's it. It is from 2007. So.
Wow. Back
in the day.
Yeah. That's funny.
Pretty impressive, though.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean that even looks good by any modern standard, actually. At least it looks good to me. I mean, it's better than my first piece. Let me see if I can find it. But yeah, so I mean, like as far as stuff is concerned now, like at least for me, my current setup, my setup that I use now online for illustration, I have upgraded. I've tried many different tablets over the years. I actually have a couple of the different Intuos tablets that I still use. I still use them on a regular basis, and I also have a Cintiq. I have the Cintiq Companion Hybrid, which is the portable one. It's an Android tablet when it's not plugged into anything, and then when you plug it into a computer, it becomes a touchscreen tablet monitor for drawing on, and I love it. But yeah, and so anyways, real quick, so what kind of software do you guys use? Like, what's your go-to, like 2 or 3 go-to programs that you guys tend to use?
For me, it's still Photoshop and Manga Studio. Like, the only thing I added was Manga Studio, and man, I love inking in Manga Studio. Like,
I'm getting used to it, but I love Sketchbook Pro. That's by far, I still think that's by far the best pencil, analog to. Maybe I shouldn't use that word digitally. It's the best way to pencil digitally. I think that's by far the best tool around. And I don't know if you guys have seen, but they just came out with Sketchbook Pro 7, which I
No.
saw. Oh
I
man, I
haven't
thought
seen
it looks pretty awesome. I'm gonna have to get that one. But I use Photoshop, but I use Photoshop primarily for coloring. For a very long time, I was doing all my inking in Adobe Illustrator with brush tool and that. And there's some benefits and negatives to using Illustrator. It's not the easiest program to learn how to use. It doesn't give you, like, Mega Studio is a beautiful package for really doing inking, because it gives you a lot of different brushes to play with, and different, not, I don't say different effects, but you can get different effects with the brushes. Whereas Illustrator, you can create different brushes. But for the most part, they all still kind of act very similar. But I got really used to doing it that way, and I get very happy with how that came out, because it's a really clean vector kind of line. But I have kind of switched over to Manga Studio. I'm using that more and more now. I still probably will switch out to do Illustrator for some things, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But for like comic book work, Manga Studio is by far the best. And that's kind of the bulk of what I use: Photoshop, Illustrator, Manga Studio, and Sketchbook Pro. I think that's about all I use.
All right. So, anyways, as far as like the stuff that I work on, right now my big go-to program actually for illustration has become Manga Studio. I mean, when I started on Manga Studio 4, the learning curve was intense. I kept trying to figure it out. I kept giving it good faith efforts. I couldn't wrap my head around it. But then, like, there was this point where it clicked, and I was like, oh, I understand what's going on with this program. See, because the program's imported to the United States from Japan,
Right.
And so it's kind of like nationalized. They had to translate the interfaces. It's not intuitive from an English speaker's perspective, for lack of a better phrase. So that one, it took me a while to figure out. Then Manga Studio 5 came out, and they revamped the entire engine. It's also known as Clip Studio Paint.
Right, they changed
the
the
other
name
name for it, because Clip Studio Paint is the original name, and then they were calling it Manga Studio on here in the States, and then so now it's the same thing. But so that's become my go-to program. When I did a daily cartoon strip, because I did a newspaper strip for about 4 or 5 years, that I did entirely in Adobe Illustrator. I'm kind of crazy for doing something that it was Illustrator is not really set up for cartooning. No. So, but it did what I needed it to do, and it was great.
Yeah. It's kind of not really backwards. It's just an alternate way of doing it, and it does. I mean, essentially, you come up with the same end result. It's just a different tool to do it with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you get the same results at the end, but the path that you take to get to that result is a little bit different. Yeah. But I'm glad that I did do it in Illustrator, because it means I always have high resolution pictures, because Illustrator is a vector program. But so I use Manga Studio mainly now. I also use Illustrator, and then Photoshop mainly for tweaks and edits. I use Photoshop more for photography stuff. And then I've started trying out some of these other programs. I mean, I've got a whole bunch of programs. I love Sketchbook Pro on my mobile devices, on my Android tablets and stuff like that. On my Cintiq, when I'm on the go, Sketchbook Pro is my go-to program. I love the way that you can sketch in that. And then I've just discovered, I do have Painter. I don't use a whole lot. I recently discovered a new program. It's not new, but it's a free program called Krita, which
okay, yeah.
Krita or Creator or something like that. But it's a free. I was on a Linux machine, because I do work in this lab that has machines that don't run Windows. They do it for graphic stuff. And I was like, well, I'd like a drawing program on this, and the only thing they have is GIMP. And GIMP's all right, but it's not. There are certain things that are a little clunky in GIMP. So I was like, I want to find a painting program that will support a tablet, but that works on Linux. And then I found this Krita program, and I tried it out, and I was like, this thing is awesome. It's kind of like a mix between, it's kind of like halfway between Manga Studio and Sketchbook Pro and Paint Tool Sci, like kind of somewhere in the middle there. And I was like, this is a really cool program, and it's 100% free, and it's open source, and it's for all platforms. And so, for anybody who's getting started in digital art and they can't afford expensive illustration software, even though Sketchbook Pro 6 and Manga Studio are like $30 each, which is really not a whole lot for art software. Try Krita. It's a great program, and try GIMP instead of Photoshop, Inkscape instead of Illustrator. I mean, there are free alternatives to get you started, but the difference is, once again, it's like speed. The commercial software is usually a little bit faster to use. The interfaces are more streamlined because they actually have a bigger budget to invest in more streamlined interfaces, faster rendering, stuff like that. But yeah, so anyways, I'm gonna real quick. I wanted to show you guys my. Let's see if I can bring it up. One of my first. This is one of my first illustrations that I did when I got a graphics tablet back in 2004. It's not the first.
Oh, cool.
I don't have the first on my machine, but this is one of the first drawings that I did. This is back in high school. I'd never really used the software before. Now, if this one did not have brush width on it at all. If we zoom in. Yeah. The brush is the same size. This was done in Corel Photo Paint because that was one of the few programs I actually had at home that apparently supported tablet input. So it was a photo editing program that I had. But anyway, so yeah, that's that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So anyways, I think that about wraps it up for the main discussion that we had. Did anybody else have any final comments?
No.
Ben, did you have anything you wanted to?
No. I think, really, if we have anybody that's watching this that's really interested in getting into this, there are bunches of different paths to get there. And you can start small and work your way up. And admittedly, is a little bit like. It's a little bit of a slippery slope because once you start down, you start using one thing, you'll start looking down the future like I want that later on, and you'll kind of grow into it. But I mean, it took me, like I said, it was a good year and a half to upgrade to a Cintiq, and that was, I was inking literally everything I could get my hands on. I was inking photographs. I'd throw photographs in the background and ink on top of them just to kind of practice. And at some point, I felt like I kind of had grown past what I could currently do with the system. And at that point, you kind of justify that next jump up. But I think to get started, it doesn't take that much, and you can kind of start like where either or any of us kind of started at various stages with lower tech, cheaper stuff with freeware, with lower cost alternatives to the big Photoshops and stuff like that. There's always places to start, to get your feet wet, get in the door, get started, and really just start drawing. Because eventually, you will kind of get comfortable, and it's one of those things too, and I think this has come up, not necessarily in this conversation, but it's come up plenty of times. I mean, you're really not limited by the software. I mean, I've seen people do stuff with Microsoft Paint that shouldn't have been possible with Paint. I mean, that's so your abilities are only limited by the software or hardware that you have, in as so much as you limit yourself to do it. You can do anything with anything if you put in the time and effort to do it. So.
Yeah, and I agree. The software and the hardware is not the end all for skill. As long as you're working at improving, as long as you're practicing and you're developing, those skills and those skill sets. That's where the art comes from. It comes from you as an artist. It comes from and it comes from practice. Working on improving things, working on improving your technique, regardless of what tools you're using. I mean, it's great that there are tools that are out there. There are free tools now, which is really cool. And I mean, they didn't exist. These free tools did not exist, 10 years ago when I started with digital art. And actually, it did take me about 10 years to get to upgrade to a Cintiq.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so past some people, they upgrade stuff fast. Some people, yeah, it takes me a while. Actually, I still use my old Graphire every once in a while. The old original tablet that I bought, it still works. And so, I use it. Sometimes I have people that need a tablet for something. I lend them my old ones. But yeah, absolutely. The hardware is really not the limiting factor. It's and the art really is from the artist. I mean, just taking Jenn's piece for example, that was her first piece.
Yeah.
So any final comments, Jenn?
No, I was just sort of thinking. We probably don't have anything now, but I was thinking that we should probably keep track of like who may be commenting or saying anything on YouTube, and then we can answer stuff in the future for when people ask stuff. But
yeah. I'm kind of looking over there, but I haven't seen anything pop up.
Yeah, I would be very surprised.
Wait, no, I take that totally back. There are comments.
Oh,
wow.
I'm
this
sorry.
Is what we get for not paying attention. Wow, we got 3 people actually. I draw with a mouse. It's a Wile E. Coyote. In fact, I don't even draw. I just use a curved line tool. That's totally doable.
Yeah, that is.
Sebastian Ortiz, I says, for now I use Manga Studio for inking and coloring. It's still very reliable. I agree. And then Jordan Edwards, I've had a Wacom bamboo pen and touch since 2010.
Nice.
I'm saving up for a Cintiq. Save those pennies, man. I've switched to
Yeah.
Manga Studio for drawings and comics, and I've just been using Photoshop and Illustrator for photos and logos, typefaces, respectively. It took me 4 years up to now to get where I am now, and it's totally cool. It's none of us got there overnight. It's I think all of us have been. Nathan, you said 10 years. Jenn, you've been doing this for quite a few years as well.
I'm totally laughing at Wendy.
Oh. Yeah, she just giggled. As my wife walked her by. Sebastian Ortiz just said, I firstly started out doing digital art on GIMP in October 2013. In January, I've switched to Fire Alpaca, where I've properly learned my way around layers. I've never heard of that one.
Yeah.
Very cool. And like I said, I mean, the tools, the tools and the software are not. We're not saying this one is the end all be all. I mean, each one of them
absolutely
has its benefits and positives and negatives. And we are using the ones that we've adapted to and gotten used to. Like, I mean, nobody uses Illustrator, I don't think, to ink like I do. But you can't. I don't want to toot my horn or anything, but you can't really argue with the results. I mean, what comes out of it for me is exactly the art I want to create. So. It's one of those things.
One of these days, you're going to open up a file so that everybody can see all the layers you have.
Yeah, that'll be a whole show, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It'll take me a whole show to go through the layers and figure out which ones are which. Sebastian just said, for a brief period in June, I've switched to Paint Tool Saya, which was sadly a trial version only, and to this day I now use Manga Studio, and like I said, it's very reliable. And it's kind of become a standout tool. I put it off for a very long time because, just like Nathan said, I mean, I got version 4 way back when, and everything just seemed backwards. To me, it just didn't make any sense. I was I was like a kid with a rock going, why doesn't this work right? And it took me quite a while to kind of get comfortable. And in fact, I had I had a session where I sat down with Nathan a while back and just had him kind of go through some stuff. And I wasn't as far off the path as I thought I was. But
no, you're actually pretty close.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's a little bit of a confidence thing. I don't use it because I'm not confident with it, and that kind of gave me a little bit more confidence to continue using it and hopefully get better with it. So. I agree. And I think that, Ben, you're probably the only person that I found that inks like I did in Illustrator. Yeah.
Because I think that was actually kind of the way we met. Was our discussion was like, yeah,
Right.
people are like, how do you do your inks? They're really smooth. And I was like, oh, I use Adobe Illustrator, and you're like, oh, I use Adobe Illustrator too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things. I used Manga Studio. I actually got comfortable with it about a year ago, and then somehow I forgot everything about how to use it, which was ridiculous. But
You're the one that got me into it.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
wow.
all your fault, man.
Yeah, I guess so. I started playing around with it. I actually inked an entire comic book page with it. Came back to it, a couple months later. I'm like, I don't remember anything what I did. I have no idea. There's no recollection of this. So that kind of set me back a little bit too. And yeah, it's one of those things. You just kind of play with it and ask some friends and ask some questions and kind of got pointed in the right direction. And I got Manga Studio 5, which is very similar.
Better.
But it is better, yeah.
It's way better. I mean, the main reason that I actually made kind of the official switch to Manga Studio 5 was just the fact that finally there was a program that I could use that allowed me to get the same look that I had in Illustrator, but also added all of the lettering tools and the coloring tools and other things that were more like Photoshop. Yep. And so all of a sudden I had this one-stop shop that allowed me to get the look that I wanted without having to switch between programs, because and this happens anyways. I mean, you'll shuffle between a bunch of programs when you're working on software or working on art, but I found that one was I mean, we're not like sponsored by Manga Studio or anything. Just
no.
Disclaimer. Yeah, I found that it was one of the few things that allowed me Manga Studio 5 was it allowed me to do pretty much everything that I wanted to do in one program. I mean, I do full pages in Manga Studio now, and then I just take them into Photoshop either for coloring or just for final line art tweaking. And Manga Studio also supports vector line art, which is my thing. Yeah. I illustrate my line art in vector because I like to be able to scale things larger and smaller without losing quality. So, anyways.
Yep, same here. I got a couple more comments on here. Wile E. Coyote, I always use Paint Tool Saya as it's been the most reliable for me. That curved line tool though. And then Jordan Edwards, I flitted back and forth when I stopped using GIMP in 2011. I flitted between Saya and Photoshop. And then Wile E. Coyote, I have to try out Manga Studio. Yeah, it's pretty awesome, and it's affordable too, which is really kind of cool. And then Jordan Edwards said, I was eyeing Manga Studio 5 for a while when I was still using Manga Studio 4. Then Nathan got me persuaded. So, cool.
All right, so I think that at least this portion, the podcast portion of the stream, we're going to wrap this up here.
Cool, and we're going to a drawing after this, right?
Yeah, so we're going to take a break, and then we will be starting a separate stream that's actually going to be the. I think, are we just going to do the random character challenge this this month, or
you guys still haven't finished mine from last month.
Yeah, you still got to do that. Okay, so we'll what, about 5 minutes and then come back to get everybody.
We'll take a 5-10 minute break, and then we will come back with another stream. Now so we'll be ending this broadcast, and then we'll be starting another broadcast. So for those of you who are watching on YouTube, just check back on the channel in a few minutes, and then the new broadcast should pop up. It will be on air, and it will be public as soon as we start that. All right.
And thank you guys for watching.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming out and watching and commenting.
And the people that watch it later, thank you too.
Yeah, thank you for coming and watching after the fact. All right. Well, this is Nathan Rackley, Ben Girven, and it's Girven, right?
Yes.
So, yeah. I always double check. Yeah. Ben Girven, and then Jenn Myers, and we are signing off. Thanks for watching.
Cool.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.